The first time I realized my son didn't love me anymore was on the day I thought I'd be his proudest guest. Instead, I stood outside the ballroom, my name left off the seating chart, as though I'd never existed. My name is Marlene. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived a life that might seem quiet to most widowed early, raised my only son, Kyle, on a nurse's salary, and spent most of my life sacrificing so that he never had to. I didn't buy new clothes. I didn't travel, but I made damn sure Kyle had every opportunity one never did. So when he told me he was getting married after years of dead-end relationships and personal struggles, I was overjoyed. At long last, my boy had found someone. Her name was Clarissa, and while she never quite warmed to me, I chalked it up to nerves, to the weight of planning a wedding, to maybe a personality that just didn't mesh with mine. I try not to take it personally. When Kyle came to me, head low and voice tight, and asked if I could help cover some of the wedding expenses, I didn't hesitate. He needed $12,500 to make up the difference for the venue deposit and catering minimums. He promised he'd pay me back in installments. But honestly, I didn't need repayment. I just wanted to see him walk down that aisle. "I can't do this without you, Mom," he said, and those words alone made the money feel like nothing. But nothing could have prepared me for what followed. The wedding day arrived. I wore the navy blue dress I'd saved for over a year to afford, bought a nice pair of low heels, and got my hair done at a real salon, not the corner place where I usually paid $15. I felt beautiful for the first time in years. I took the early train to the venue, a high-end winery turned wedding hall nestled in the hills. I'd even helped Clarissa's mother make ribbon bundles for the favors just 2 nights prior. I thought maybe, just maybe, I was finally being accepted into something bigger than just motherhood. I was becoming a part of their future. But when I arrived, things began unraveling, slowly and then all at once. "Hi, I'm Marlene Winters. I believe I'm at table 7. I asked the greeter, a young woman with a clipboard and a tight smile. She skimmed the list. "I'm sorry, there's no Marlene Winters listed on the seating chart." "Oh, that can't be right," I said, laughing lightly, suddenly aware of the sweat forming at my hairline. "I'm the groom's mother." She double-checked, then stepped away to whisper to another coordinator. I stood awkwardly near the entrance, feeling the stares of arriving guests glide across me like cold wind. 10 minutes passed, then 20. Finally, a man in a headset returned and said, "You're welcome to sit in the back row of the ceremony area, ma'am. Unfortunately, all the reception tables are at capacity." Reception tables. At capacity. I blinked. What about my meal? I selected salmon on the RSVP. Months ago. He frowned. "Ma'am, I'm really sorry. Maybe you can speak with the couple after the ceremony." The couple. Not your son. Just the couple. The ceremony itself was beautiful. I couldn't deny that. Clarissa looked stunning in lace and pearls. Kyle looked proud. I sat alone in the very last row, far enough that the wind carried their vows away before they reached me. I strained to hear his voice say, "I do." But the only thing that truly landed was the sharp thud in my chest. As guests were escorted to the reception, I tried to follow. "I'm the groom's mother," I kept repeating like a mantra, but it got me nowhere. At the reception hall doors, a security guard gently blocked my way. "You're not on the list, ma'am. I'm going to need you to step aside." And so I did. I stood on the patio, alone, as laughter and music spilled out from inside. I could see the chandeliers, the clinking glasses, the smiling faces of people I didn't know, eating food I had paid for. I pulled out my phone and texted Kyle. "Me. I think there's been a mistake. They won't let me in." Minutes passed. Then 10. Then 20. Nothing. I called. Straight to voicemail. That was when the truth sank in. There was no mistake. I wasn't wanted there. And not just by Clarissa, but by my son. I took the late train home, still in my dress, makeup streaked by tears I hadn't realized I was crying. At home, I sat on the couch and stared at the family photo on the mantel. Kyle at 13, a bright grin, arms around my neck. What had happened to him? What had happened to us? The next morning, there was a single message from him. "Kyle, sorry about yesterday. Things were chaotic. Clarissa didn't think there'd be space, and I didn't want to stress her out. Hope you understand. No apology for leaving me out. No acknowledgement of the $12,500 I'd given without hesitation. No effort to make it right." I typed out 20 versions of a response, each one ranging from furious to devastated. but I didn't send any. Instead, I opened my drawer and pulled out the small notebook where I kept my financial records. I turned to the last page, wrote, "Wedding gift, $12,500, and underlined it twice. Then I closed it, placed it back in the drawer, and started making a new list. A different one. Things I've given to Kyle. Sleepless nights. Canceled vacations. Second jobs. Full college tuition. The only car I ever owned. My wedding ring to pay for his emergency dental. My health, bit by bit. And now my dignity. And what has he given me in return? A cold patio and a locked reception door. 3 days later, Kyle called. His tone was cheerful, as if nothing had happened. "Hey, Mom. I wanted to swing by this weekend. Clarissa and I are thinking of taking a small trip and wondered if you'd mind watching the dog." I stared at the phone. He truly didn't get it. "I'm busy," I said simply. "Oh, with what?" "I'm enrolling in a senior travel club," I replied. "Thinking of visiting Italy. Maybe Spain." A pause. "Since when?" "Since I realized I've spent enough of my life waiting on people who forget me." There was silence. A confused silence. I could almost hear him struggling to compute the shift. "You okay, Mom?" "For the first time in a long time," I said. "I think I'm getting there." But I wasn't okay. Not yet. The betrayal lived under my skin like a splinter I couldn't quite reach. What hurt the most wasn't just being excluded from my own son's wedding. It was the way he treated my sacrifices like background noise in his story, as if all I'd done was expected, forgotten. But that was about to change. Because a week later, I received a letter in the mail. Handwritten. From Clarissa's mother. What she wrote would change everything. The envelope was cream-colored with delicate floral embossing, and I recognized the elegant cursive of Clarissa's mother, Diane. We hadn't spoken much. She'd always been polite, distant, composed, someone who smiled with her mouth and never her eyes. I sat at the kitchen table and opened the letter with trembling hands. I didn't know what I expected, maybe a perfunctory thank you or some shallow gesture of civility. But what I read left me speechless. "Dear Marlene, I have wrestled with whether or not to write this for days now, but I believe you deserve to know the truth, regardless of how difficult it may be to hear. I had no idea you were not on the guest list until the morning of the wedding. I assumed, like any sane mother would, that you would be seated front and center, perhaps beside me. When I asked Clarissa why you weren't included, she told me it was Kyle's decision. She said, verbatim, Kyle said he didn't want her there. He said she always makes things about herself and that it would be better if she watched from the sidelines." I pressed her further. "She said you had given money toward the wedding." When I found out how much, $12,500, I was horrified. "Marlene, I know we've never been close, but I am a mother, too. And I cannot imagine a world where I would exclude the woman who raised my husband, who gave up everything so he could become the man he is. You deserve better. I am so sorry for my silence that day. I wish I had spoken up. With respect, Diane Mathers." My vision blurred as I reread the letter again and again, the words twisting in my gut like knives. It hadn't been Clarissa who left me out. It was Kyle. My only child. I had told myself that maybe she'd manipulated him. Maybe she'd made the decision and he had gone along reluctantly. That had been my shield. My only remaining protection against heartbreak. But he had chosen to erase me. He had chosen. I placed the letter down, walked to the sink, and splashed cold water on my face. Then I looked at myself in the mirror above the stovered eyes, deep wrinkles, lips tight with grief. And I said, aloud, "No more." The next day, I made an appointment with a lawyer. Not to sue him, though Lord knows that thought crossed my mind, but to revise my will, restructure my savings, and place my assets into a living trust with clear stipulations. If Kyle wanted to remove me from his life, he would receive the same courtesy in return. He had inherited so much already: time, my labor, my patience, my money. He would not inherit a cent more. I left the lawyer's office feeling hollow but strangely empowered. As I walked back to the bus stop, I passed a small bookstore with a handwritten sign in the window. "It's never too late to start your next chapter." I stepped inside. Over the next month, I tried to rebuild the life I had buried beneath motherhood. I joined a walking group for seniors in the park. I attended a wine tasting class. I dusted off the old Italian language cassette tapes I had bought 30 years ago, but never had time to open. I even started a blog. Nothing fancy, just a place for my thoughts. A digital diary. I called it Second Bloom. My first post was about the wedding. I wrote, I once believed motherhood was a one-way mirror, always watching, never being seen. But I see myself now. And that's something. Within 2 weeks, the post had over 1,000 shares. People from all over the country, mostly women, mostly mothers, began commenting, emailing, sharing their own stories of quiet pain, of being forgotten. And then I got a message from Kyle. Mom, what is this blog? People are messaging Clarissa saying you were abandoned at our wedding. This is making us look terrible. Please take it down. I stared at the message for a long while before replying. I never used your name. I told my truth. If you feel seen in that, maybe you should ask yourself why. He didn't respond. But the messages from strangers kept coming. One woman wrote, I cried reading this. My daughter married a man who hates me. I paid for the dress and wasn't even allowed in the pictures. Another said, I raised 5 kids. Not one remembered my birthday this year. Your words made me feel less invisible. I wasn't alone. And that changed everything. A local newspaper contacted me for an interview. The headline read, Ignored, Erased, Reborn. How one woman turned heartbreak into her second act. It was surreal. And then one morning, as I was preparing coffee, the doorbell rang. It was Kyle. He stood there on my porch in pressed slacks and a stiff button-down, holding a bouquet of flowers that looked like they'd been bought in a rush at the corner store. Hi, Mom, he said. I opened the screen door, but didn't invite him in. I saw the article, he said. You made me out to be the bad guy. I didn't need to, I replied. You did that yourself. His face flushed. You don't understand how hard it was. Clarissa was nervous, and I didn't want to fight with her. So you chose her over me. No, I just didn't think it was a big deal. I laughed bitterly. You didn't think it was a big deal to leave your mother outside your wedding? After she paid more than 12 grand to help make it happen. His eyes darted down. I've given you everything, Kyle, I said, my voice trembling. And for the first time, I'm giving myself something. Space. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sure you are, I said. But apologies don't fix what's already broken. They don't undo choices. He stepped back. You're cutting me out then? I'm giving myself peace, I said. You'll have to decide what to do with that. I closed the door gently. And I cried. Not out of pain, but out of release. Weeks passed. I received an offer from a publisher to turn my blog posts into a book of essays. They offered a small advance. I said yes. I started hosting a local support group at the library for older women navigating estrangement, loneliness, and grief. We called it the Quiet Mother's Circle. And I booked a ticket to Tuscany. Yes, Tuscany. I would spend 2 weeks in a small countryside inn, sipping espresso and practicing my terrible Italian. I'll send a few more messages. Some apologetic, some defensive. I read them but didn't reply. It wasn't revenge. It was liberation. For decades, I had made myself small so he could feel big. I had sacrificed joy so he wouldn't go without. And he had chosen to erase me. So now, I was choosing to remember myself. To live loudly. To bloom. The plane to Florence lifted off on a Thursday afternoon, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I had to answer to anyone. No phone to babysit. No dinner to cook. No worried texts to send. I watched the clouds scatter across the Atlantic from my window seat and felt something I hadn't felt in years. Lightness. The Tuscan countryside greeted me with golden hills and warm winds. The little inn I had chosen, Villa Carmela, sat nestled among olive trees and red poppies, with an old woman named Francesca running the kitchen and speaking in rapid-fire Italian that made me laugh even when I didn't understand a word. I spent my mornings sipping espresso beneath a vine-covered trellis and my afternoons walking alone through villages with cracked cobblestones and hanging laundry that smelled of lavender and sun. No one here knew me as Kyle's mom. No one asked me for favors or money or emotional labor. Here, I was simply Marlene. And that was enough. One afternoon, as I wandered into a ceramic shop in a town called Montepulciano, I struck up a conversation with a fellow traveler, a woman named Judith from Nova Scotia. She was 65, divorced for 20 years, and traveling alone for the first time. We sat on a bench and talked for hours about children, regrets, the sharp edges of aging that no one warns you about. I used to feel invisible, Judith said, brushing breadcrumbs off her skirt. But now, I feel like a ghost who finally gets to haunt the places I always wanted to live in. I laughed. That's beautiful. I read your blog, You know, she added, surprising me. I didn't know it was you until now. The post about the wedding, the back row, that one broke me. My eyes filled before I could stop them. I guess it broke me too, I said softly. She reached out and squeezed my hand. I'm glad you wrote it. Back home, my inbox had filled with more letters from readers. But now, there were different kinds, 2 letters from adult children. Some defensive, some angry, but many full of humility and pain. One read, I read your story. I haven't spoken to my mom in 6 years. I don't even remember why. I'm calling her today. Thank you for reminding me what I forgot. Another, I never thought of what my mother sacrificed for me. We always think they'll be there, quietly in the background. I'm sorry for what your son did. I hope he wakes up. But Kyle still hadn't reached out again. And that was okay. By the second week in Tuscany, something inside me began to shift. It was subtle, like the way wind changes just before a storm breaks. I no longer dreamed of confrontation or apology. I no longer imagined what I would say to Kyle if he showed up at my door. I was somehow releasing it. The final night before my flight home, Francesca made saffron risotto and poured limoncello into tiny glass tumblers. She danced barefoot across the tiled kitchen while a record played old Italian ballads. A few other guests joined in. And for the first time since I had stood outside that wedding hall, alone and unwanted, I laughed from somewhere deep in my stomach. Judith handed me a Polaroid she had snapped during the dance. Take this, she said. Proof that you're still here. In the photo, my arms are raised, and I'm laughing mid-spin, my silver hair wild and my face flushed. I hadn't seen myself like that in decades. When I returned home, the air felt sharper, the sun more precise. Everything looked the same, yet I wasn't. I unpacked slowly, placing the Polaroid on my fridge with a magnet Kyle had made me when he was 6. A ladybug made of buttons and glue. I didn't remove it. It belonged to a different version of him, one I still cherished. I started writing the book. I poured my heart into each page, stories of sacrifice, motherhood, erasure, and rediscovery. I didn't hold back. I let the pain bleed out alongside the joy. Each word was a step further from silence. One morning, while at the public library editing the chapter titled The Day I Was Erased, I noticed a familiar figure by the shelves. Kyle. He looked tired, older, not the confident, smiling groom from the wedding photos I had scrolled past months ago. He held a small book in his hand and glanced up, meeting my eyes. I froze. He walked toward me slowly. Mom. I closed my laptop gently. I didn't know you came here, he said. I didn't know you read. I replied, trying to keep the edge out of my voice. He gave a small, sad laugh. Fair. We stood in awkward silence for a beat. I read your blog, he finally said. And the article. And Clarissa left. I blinked. Left? He nodded. 2 weeks ago. She said she couldn't live in the shadow of a ghost I refused to acknowledge. I stared at him. What does that mean? He swallowed hard. She said I hated myself for what I did to you. And instead of fixing it, I buried it. And I buried you with it. I felt the breath leave my lungs. She was right, he said. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small checkbook. I want to repay you. The wedding. Every cent. I shook my head. It was never about the money. I know, he said, his voice cracking. It was about love. And I made you feel disposable. You didn't make me feel, I said. You made me know. He lowered his eyes. I'm sorry. A deep silence stretched between us, full of everything unsaid, everything broken, everything that still ached. Why now? I asked. He looked at me, and his eyes were red. Because I thought I'd be okay without you. But I'm not. I'm not whole. I nodded slowly, feeling something warm and uncertain stir in my chest. I don't know if I can forgive you, I said honestly. He nodded. I'm not asking you to. I just want to start. Trying. If that's okay. I looked at him, really looked, and saw the little boy again. The one who used to fall asleep on my lap during thunderstorms. I'm not the same woman you left outside that wedding, I said. I know. And I don't need you in the same way I used to. I know that too. But maybe, I whispered, there's still room for something new. Something different. His shoulders shook. And then, for the first time in over a year, I reached for my son. And this time, he didn't let go. Forgiveness doesn't arrive all at once. It tiptoes in like a shy guest, quiet, hesitant, uncertain whether it's welcome. Kyle and I didn't fix everything that afternoon in the library. There were still bruises in my heart, still memories that stung like fresh wounds. But we opened a door just a crack, and for now, that was enough. In the days that followed, he called more often, not to ask for help, not to borrow money, just to talk. Sometimes, we said very little. A short exchange about the weather, a passing joke, but the silence between us no longer felt loaded. It felt lived in, like a familiar hallway we were learning to walk through again. He asked if he could come over for dinner. I hesitated, then said yes. He arrived holding a bag of groceries and a cookbook tucked under his arm. I thought maybe I could cook this time, he said. I smiled. We'll see if your cooking redeems you. He laughed nervously and got to work. We made pasta with mushroom cream sauce. He oversalted it, and I pretended not to notice. Afterward, he cleared the table without asking, and when I stepped into the kitchen, I found the dishes already rinsed and stacked. It was a small gesture, but to me, it was the loudest apology he could offer. Later that night, I pulled out a wooden box from my closet, the one that held all his childhood drawings, birthday cards, crayon-written poems with uneven letters. I held a drawing of us in stick figure form, me with wild orange hair and a big smile. Me and Mommy, the bestest ever. I used to cling to that drawing like a life raft. Now, I looked at it with a strange mixture of grief and grace. That boy still lived somewhere inside the man who had broken my heart. And maybe, just maybe, he was waking up again. The next day, I wrote a blog post. Forgiveness is not forgetting. It's remembering and choosing love anyway. Not love without boundaries. Not love that excuses, but love that allows room to rebuild. The post went viral. It was reprinted in magazines, shared by advocacy groups, read aloud on podcasts, and it brought even more letters. From mothers, sons, daughters. From women who had waited years for a single, "I'm sorry." From men who hadn't spoken to their parents since high school. From grown children who said, "I didn't know how much she gave me. Now I do." Kyle read the post. He called the next morning. "I didn't realize how many people felt the same way," he said. "Neither did I," I replied. He paused. "Would you ever write about us together?" I hesitated. "Only if you're okay with that. I think I want people to know I'm trying." That was the first time I saw him not as the villain in my story, but as a man struggling to rewrite his own. In early spring, he invited me to coffee, a small place near the park where we used to walk when he was little. When I arrived, he was already sitting at a window table, 2 steaming mugs in front of him. He looked nervous. I wanted to talk to you about something," he said. I sat down slowly. "All right." He rubbed his hands together. "I've been seeing a therapist." That caught me off guard. "I didn't think I needed it," he continued. "But I've been unpacking a lot. Stuff from when Dad died. Stuff from how I treated you. Stuff I never really let myself feel." I nodded slowly. "That's brave." "It's overdue," he said. He looked at me, then really looked. And I realized something. All those years, I let my shame become silence. I thought if I ignored what I did, it would go away. But it didn't. It just built a wall between us. I felt my throat tighten. "I don't expect you to trust me overnight," he said. "But I'm not going anywhere. I want to earn my place back." I reached across the table and rested my hand over his. "You're doing it," I whispered. "One moment at a time." By summer, things had shifted again. We weren't perfect. Some days still carried shadows. But we were learning to live beside the cracks. Kyle began joining me at the Quiet Mother's Circle. Not as a speaker, just as a listener. He'd sit in the back of the library room, nodding slowly as women spoke about what it felt like to be invisible to the children they raised. One woman, a retired teacher named Eileen, spoke about being cut off by her daughter after a disagreement about her wedding venue. Her voice cracked as she said, "I never asked to be thanked, just to be remembered." After the meeting, Kyle walked up to her and said, "I forgot my own mother once. I'm trying every day not to forget again." Eileen hugged him. So did half the room. That fall, I signed the publishing contract for my book, The Back Row: What Love Leaves Behind. My editor called it a roadmap for grief and reconciliation. I called it my offering. The release date was set for the following spring. A small book tour, readings in libraries and bookstores from New York to San Francisco. And Kyle? He offered to drive me to every single one. "Are you sure you want to be part of this?" I asked. "It's not all flattering. I need to sit in the audience," he said. "I need to hear the hard parts." So I let him. And on one particularly emotional night in Chicago, when I read aloud the chapter titled The Wedding That Wasn't Mine, I saw tears in his eyes. After the reading, a young man came up and asked for my autograph. "My mom raised me on her own," he said, "and I haven't spoken to her in 2 years. I think I'm going to call her tonight." I signed the book with shaking hands. Kyle smiled quietly beside me. "You've done something here, Mom," he whispered. "You turned pain into a map." I looked at him, the boy I raised and the man I was still learning to know. "No," I said. "We did. That winter, just before Christmas, Kyle invited me to dinner again, only this time, not at my house. At his. When I arrived, the porch was lit with tiny string lights. Inside, the table was set for two. No wedding photos on the walls. Just framed black and white pictures of his childhood, some I hadn't seen in years. As I sat down, he handed me a small envelope. "What's this?" I asked. He took a deep breath. "Something overdue." Inside was a check. $12,500. I looked at him. "I know you said it wasn't about the money," he said, "but I needed to return it anyway. Not because you asked for it. Because I want to honor what you gave me." I placed the check on the table and smiled. "Let me tell you what I've really gained," I said. "A son I thought I'd lost. That's worth more than anything." He reached for my hand. And for the first time since that terrible day outside the wedding hall, I felt like I was finally home. Spring came gently, like a long-awaited letter from an old friend. The air smelled like lilacs. My knees ached a little more in the mornings, but my heart hurt less. The book launched in March. The publisher had organized a modest tour: 12 cities, library talks, bookstore readings, a few interviews on local radio stations. I wasn't famous. I didn't want to be. But I had a voice now, and people were listening. Kyle drove me from stop to stop, sometimes carrying my bag, sometimes just sitting in the back of the room. He always waited until the last person had left to ask quietly, "You okay?" And I always nodded. Because I was. One night in Seattle, a woman stood during the Q&A and asked, "Do you think it's ever too late to rebuild love?" The question hung in the air like smoke. I took a breath and answered, "It's never too late to offer love. But it's never guaranteed that someone will catch it. And you have to be okay with that." She cried. So did I. Afterward, she handed me a folded photo of her and her son taken 10 years earlier at his high school graduation. "I hope he still remembers me like this," she said. I pressed the photo to my chest. Write him anyway. In May, on my 69th birthday, Kyle made dinner again. He grilled vegetables, burned the first round of eggplant, but I pretended not to notice. Then, halfway through the meal, he handed me a gift, a small wrapped box tied in blue string. Inside was a photo album. Each page was filled with old photographs, some I hadn't seen in decades. Kyle at the beach with jelly-covered cheeks. Kyle asleep on my chest in a hospital chair. Kyle, age 4, drawing with his tongue sticking out. Me, laughing behind him. He'd captioned every page. "You gave me my world." I forgot for a while. I remember now. "This page is blank because I want to fill it with new memories with you." I wept. He didn't look away. "I may never undo what I did," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I want to be someone worthy of being your son." I took his hand in mine. "You already are," I said. And I meant it. Summer passed in soft shades of gold. The blog grew. The support group expanded. More chapters of the Quiet Mother's Circle formed in other towns. I started hearing from men, twosons and fathers trying to find their way back. It became bigger than me. And that was the point. One day, I received an email from Diane Clarissa's mother. We hadn't spoken since her letter, though I often thought of her. "Marlene, I saw the book. I read every page. I cried for you. For me. For all of us. Clarissa and I are not speaking much these days. But your words made me reach out anyway." I told her what I never told my own mother. "Thank you for being brave first. With deep respect, Diane." I sat in silence after reading it, staring at the wall where I'd once hung my son's childhood drawings. They were still there. But now, beside them, was something else. A framed quote from my own book. "We spend so much of our lives waiting for the love we gave to circle back. But sometimes, the most radical thing we can do is give that love to ourselves." In early fall, I was asked to give a keynote at a caregiving conference in Chicago. Hundreds of women gathered. Some wore nurses' uniforms. Others came straight from work. Some pushed walkers. Others held grandchildren on their laps. I stood on stage, the lights blinding, the microphone trembling slightly in my hand. And I told them the truth, that I had spent 68 years waiting to feel visible, that I had paid for a wedding I never saw, raised a son who forgot me, and lived in the back row of my own life for far too long. That I forgave him not because he deserved it, but because I deserved peace. That rebuilding love is not about grand gestures. It's about small, quiet choices, like showing up, listening, washing dishes after dinner. When I finished, the room stood. Some clapped. Others simply cried. And in the back row, as always, Kyle stood. He didn't clap. He just put his hand to his chest. And I knew. That winter, we made a decision together. Every Sunday, we'd cook dinner just the two of us and invite someone else who needed it. A neighbor, a stranger from my support group, a widowed man from Kyle's office, a single mom from the library. We called it Open Table. There were no rules. Just food, warmth, and conversation. Sometimes the guests talked about their own estranged families. Sometimes they talked about recipes. Sometimes they just needed to sit near people who weren't looking at their phones. The room always smelled like garlic and rosemary. The wine flowed freely. One guest said, "It feels like a room with the window open." I knew exactly what she meant. On New Year's Eve, Kyle and I walked down to the lake near our house. The same lake where we used to feed ducks when he was little. He was quiet. So was I. Just before midnight, he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. "I wasn't sure when to give you this," he said, "but now feels right." Inside was a simple printout, a flight itinerary to Florence. I blinked. "Tuscany." He smiled. "The same little inn. I called Francesca. She remembered you." I laughed, then cried. "You're kidding." "No," he said. "I want to see the place that gave me back my mother." I leaned into him, and for the first time, I felt something settle in me. Not just forgiveness, but peace. Not just hope, but closure. Not just love, but choice. We went to Italy that spring. The poppies were blooming again. Francesca hadn't aged a day. She fed us too much and taught Kyle how to make risotto properly this time. We took long walks, sat in old churches, lit candles for people we had lost, and people we almost did. On our last night, Kyle took a Polaroid of me spinning barefoot on the tiled kitchen floor while music played and the moon hung just outside the window. He framed it when we got home and placed it beside the one I'd taken years ago of me laughing, arms raised, in the same kitchen. 2 pictures, 2 women, both me, one broken, one rebuilt, and both fully alive.